Welcome to the panel on visualizing our future through the lens of big data. And I assume if you took the time to come here right after lunch that you're a big data freak, just like me. It's my new passion. And I really got the lucky card in the moderator sweepstakes because I have the chance to meet this morning with three amazing guys who are doing just phenomenal stuff in this area. They're going to show you some really great data visualizations that will blow your mind. But before we jump into that, I think first I want to let you know who they are, and then we're going to do a lightning round about like what is big data anyway. So first off, Ed Parsons. Ed is the geospatial technologist at Google, and his responsibility is for evangelizing Google's mission to organize the world's information using geography and tools. That includes Google Maps, Google Earth, and Google Maps for mobile. And anybody who's clicked on Google Maps and hovered over their own house will know just how exciting that little bit of technology is. At Google Earth, he told me, he's essentially building a telescope for the planet, which is a really great idea if you try to get your head around it. You know, we've always seen sort of the sky from Earth, but you know, we've never seen Earth from the sky except for that great blue marble picture from space. And his mission is to bring some emotion into that, that task and maybe make you cry when you see a map, which would be the ultimate resolution of those two conflicting things. Next up, we have David McConnell. David is the president of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, where his passion is linking art, design, and science in the pursuit of to complete to address global challenges. And I would have to say probably his motto is, it's the system stupid, right? If that's what Bucky was all about. David is also co-founder of the Illuminati design and engineering firm, and he's creative director of the Worldviews Network, which is a collaboration of artists, scientists, and educators using storytelling to prompt dialogue around community resilience in science centers across the United States. Finally, we have Ken J. Williams. Ken J. is the founder and director of Bella Gaia, an amazing film. He's an award-winning filmmaker, music producer, theatrical show director, and a classically trained violinist on top of all that. He also is linking art and science, so you can see a theme shaping up here. He works with people as diverse as NASA scientists, Deepak Chopra, really bringing those two sort of right brain, left brain functions together. Bella Gaia has already had 100 shows, toured 8 countries, reached some 200,000 people in person, and about 6 million through online and TV. And we're going to be lucky enough to have a performance of Bella Gaia here at the Aspen Institute this week. And when is that going to be?
Tomorrow at 4 o'clock at Pepke.
Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, Pepke. Be there. So before we launch into their presentations, Ed, what is big data?
Very good question. I think if we're brutally honest, it's a bit of a marketing term at this point in time. It's an opportunity for companies to sell you stuff. But there is an underlying change afoot in that the volumes of data that we are generating ourselves and are being generated by remote sensing satellites and measuring the world is increasing enormously. Perhaps within the next 10 years, it will increase by 2 orders of magnitude. So there's going to be much more data to deal with, much of it generated by machines that are measuring things in a much more automated fashion than today. And big data is about analyzing that huge volume of data in approaching real time. And obviously, from an environmental point of view, there are huge benefits in us being able to measure the environment better.
David, what would you like to add to that?
He's right.
He's right.
I mean, a lot of people are talking about big data these days, but it's not something new. You know, this is
right.
We have these new capacities for collecting more and more and more of it, but I think humans, as long as we've been around, have been trying to find clever ways to understand and interpret all of this gestalt of information that we get going through life. And so big data is really kind of the latest iteration of that to apply computing power to understand that.
Cool. Kenjay, where do you see yourself fitting in on this?
So what I think I bring to the table is I'm an artist, and I bring audiovisual experiences enhancing the data. And I'm here going to talk about the importance of the emotional and personal connection and storytelling of this data and information that we are awash in. So.
Sounds great. Let's see what it looks like. You can't talk data visualization without visualizing some of it. So Ed, take it away.
Okay, yeah. It's funny, I was worried when we first started doing this, thinking, oh, no slides, this is going to make this really difficult. But fortunately, we can have some slides. Visualization is very difficult to talk about without images. And this is an image you will see numerous times, probably just in the next hour, but potentially many times over the next few days here. It's the famous blue marble, that image of the Earth in space that has become so familiar to us and has motivated many environmental organizations around the world. It's entered our consciousness. It's something that we all grow up being familiar with. But what's really interesting is it's something that has only been seen actually by people with their own eyes relatively recently, and it's only been seen by approximately 20 people. It's only the astronauts that have traveled beyond the Earth's orbit, so sorry, if you're in the International Space Station, you don't see the blue marble. You've got to go all the way out to the moon and look back to be able to see this blue sphere. So these were the first people to see it, the crew of Apollo 8 in 1968, who produced the famous Earthrise picture. But of course, this has become very familiar to us now because through visualization, through technology, this has become much more accessible. It's become much more accessible because we get access to information about our planet and the visualization of that information through mass market tools. So actually, what you were looking at there was the blue marble as seen through Google Earth. And Google Earth is an amazing tool. We designed it initially as an experiment as a bunch of computer engineers just to see how well the latest sort of generation of computer graphics technology could operate. And we were looking for a problem to pose, and visualizing the Earth's data and the many scales of information was one of those. We had no idea at the time of the actual environmental, emotional impact it will have on society. Very small things that we can change can have a big impact when we visualize information. There you're seeing Google Earth without national boundaries drawn on. They're there as an option. You can switch them on and off, and actually those boundaries cause us huge challenges as an organization. Trying to get different nations to agree on where boundaries are in some parts of the world is hugely complex. But actually just drawing the globe without boundaries in itself is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful because it's something, as I said, that's very accessible to people now. Just a show of hands, how many people here have not used Google Earth? There's a few strange people in the audience, but very, very few. And that's not surprising. Google Earth has been downloaded by 1 billion users. And I'm still shocked by that figure. 1 billion users is approximately equivalent to the number of people that use Facebook and Twitter combined. So in terms of a social network of such, people using Google Earth, viewing their home planet, is as big a community as those famous social networks. And we all approach Google Earth in the same way. We start by zooming into our home. We identify the part of the world that we know really well. And we start internally to tell narratives. We start to say, okay, that's where I live, that's where I might go shopping, that's my routes to work, that's where my kids go to school. We develop a relationship with the information because it's familiar to us. It's something that we have a direct experience of, even though we're looking at imagery that may have been acquired from satellites or more likely from aerial photography. But that trust, that relationship is really important because when we go to a part of the world that we've never visited, we may never visit. When we look at Antarctica or we look at the Amazonian rainforest, we're using a tool that we already know and understand and trust because we've used it in places that we recognize. And it also visualizes information in a way that we're very familiar with. As I'm a geographer by training, I understand maps. I can read maps. I don't have too many problems with them. But actually, many people struggle with maps as a way of visualizing information. And in the broader sense, we need to think very carefully as scientists or as environmentalists or as policymakers, how do we visualize? What tools do we use to tell the story, to provide the narrative that's important to us? How do we see the world? And I'm going to carry out a thought experiment with you. This being after lunch, this could be dangerous. I'll explain why. I want you to think of, in this case, a location. I want you to close your eyes, everybody, including my colleagues on the stage. Close your eyes and think of the city of Sydney, Australia. Okay? Have that in your mind's eye. Okay, open your eyes. How many people saw this? Amazing. How many people saw that? We don't think in terms of maps. Maps are abstract. Maps are very useful if you're carrying out a specific task, if you want to get from Circular Quay to the hotel that you're staying at. But actually, that's not the way we visualize the world. We visualize the world in 3 dimensions. We visualize it standing on a street corner. And recognizing that fact and recognizing that different people visualize the world and connect and have different levels of cognition with different types of visualization is very important. We recently announced an upgrade to Google Earth that takes that 3D visualization to the next level. This is actually a 3D model of San Francisco. You're not actually seeing the city. We're combining the contents of a number of aerial photography missions together and seeing the world pretty much as if you were flying over it in a helicopter. This is an incredibly powerful technology. And what's really, I think, interesting from a technology point of view is this is something that we've developed from the get-go to work on mobile devices. This isn't something that you need a PC to run. This will run on your mobile phone or your tablet device. Again, making, if you think about it, probably over 20 petabytes worth of information accessible to you on your mobile phone or wherever you might be. Now, people have started to use this technology to try to visualize, try to represent more complex environmental data than just what does the world look like. I did a couple of projects a few years ago with the Hadley Centre, which is part of the Met Office in the UK, the government agency responsible for managing and measuring climate change. And they produced this visualization of the temperature change estimated to be the case over the next 50 years. And they brought up, YouTube videos of scientists that would talk about what was going to be the particular impact of climate change on water availability. And it was great, and we got to stand on stage with the Prime Minister, and we got numerous kind of press coverage. But actually not many people visited this site, and those people that did visit the site really didn't connect with it. They didn't understand what was going on, and most importantly, they didn't understand how it would impact on them. This was all very well, this is all very abstract and cold. We have to think kind of beyond traditional data visualization. We need to think about, well, how do we connect more with the communities of people that are now getting access to this data? This is a nice example. This is a website that's put together by some computer enthusiasts in Switzerland, and it allows you to visualize the location of every aircraft flying over Switzerland in real time, combined with a 3D model of that aircraft. Now, this is something that actually very few governments have the capability to do, but here you have a bunch of guys working out of their bedrooms, connecting a network of radios that pick up a particular radio transmission that all airliners give to be able to visualize air traffic anywhere around the world. And it's done from the bottom up. Moving beyond visualization, as I said, is recognizing the fact that often our heart is more powerful than our brain when we really want to drive home a message. And my speakers following on from me will drive that home more strongly than I can. Our limited experience, and it is limited, is things like this. This is a website that we built very quickly after the tsunami and events that happened in Japan, making use of Street View. Street View is that ability to capture street-level photography. So we identified the particular parts of Japan that had been impacted by the tsunami, and literally did a before and after. So this was the imagery of this particular village pre the tsunami, and it's Street View, something that, again, we're all familiar with. We might well do this in our own neighborhood. What we really wanted to drive home was the actual impact of the tsunami. So if we now click to the post-tsunami of the same area, this really drives home the impact of that disaster. By being in the same place, by having the same tools, that level of trust, that level of understanding, we can actually portray quite a powerful message using that technology that's now accessible to us. But I leave you with a challenge, and this is a challenge you will have heard. And this is a question I continually ask my colleagues at Google, because we need to get better at this. When did a map last make you cry? We see, well, if you're a cartographer, there's some really bad maps in the world that may make you cry. But in terms of a media, a way of communicating information, of course, books make us cry, TV shows, movies do. They tug at the heartstrings. Maybe it's the case that this technology is just too new. We haven't learned how to use these tools in that narrative sense to really drive home messages. Hopefully, today we'll learn a little bit more about the directions that we're going in. I'd love to carry on the conversation with you. This is where I am online. Thank you very much for listening.
David.
So I'd actually like to talk a little bit about problem solving today, but I got here through a pretty circuitous route. My current trajectory of visualizing big data really began with a Burning Man installation about a decade ago, when a good friend of mine, who's the lead astrovisualizer at the Hayden Planetarium in New York, wanted to take the planetarium out to the playa. My company was making this hardware and these domes, but he had worked with these engineers and scientists and artists from all over the world to create this incredible visualization platform inspired by the Charles and Ray Eames Powers of 10 film, for those of you that have seen that. And they were collecting this new model of the universe that, by a back-of-the-napkin sketch, it represented about $10 billion of data, of astronomical observations. And it was such a big hit at Burning Man that my company decided to go mobile with it. And we created these inflatable structures, and we take them all over the world now, and they're installed all over the place. NASA uses them, NOAA uses them, universities, elementary schools. And the idea is to be able to use perceptual immersion as a way to immerse people within maps, to, as Ed pointed out, to help make people cry with maps, because we can have these profound affective experiences. And I've been very fortunate to be able to use these tools for the past number of years. And I've been working with a number of scientists and educators in science centers across the US in this project called the Worldviews Network that's funded by NOAA. And we're primarily within science centers, but we're also working within communities. Here you see in Denver, New York, San Francisco, at the White House. We've been very fortunate to be able to present in a wide number of places. And our strategy is really to use big data to demonstrate the interconnectedness of phenomena across cosmic, global, and bioregional scales. We combine visual thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking to really encourage communities to participate in dialogues about how our collective actions shape the future of our planet. But I'm not going to show any of this because Kenzie's going to be showing us some really lovely demonstrations later on. He uses a lot of the same data and software. But since I've been able to give these presentations to a really wide number of audiences, I've noticed something common amongst all of them. And that's that for the most part, the universe is made of stories, not atoms. Right? This is an observation of the poet Muriel Rukeyser, and this is very, very wise, that no matter how much data you have, if you don't have a compelling story, it's all but meaningless. But something else that I've noticed is that, I was pretty surprised by this actually, is that a lot of people have a very old model of their universe in their head. That they really think of the cosmos in this kind of mechanistic way, that things are very causal. This is really an idea that emerged in the 19th century after the first scientific revolution. And in this story, the cosmos is very predictable, and that it's believed if we just gather enough data, we could be able to predict everything. Well, in the 20th century, we actually had another scientific revolution, and it's still ongoing. And our idea of the universe is really evolving, and we're starting to understand that it's really a whole series of complex adaptive systems that from the subatomic to the galactic scales, we're witnessing how the breakdown of stable systems often result in new forms in organization. We're starting to really recognize these patterns across all these different scales. And perhaps most importantly, scientists continue to discover that in every scale of reality, from the quantum to the cosmic, that everything actually is interconnected. And the most profound example of this is really the life support systems of our own planet. And so this realization of a paradigm of really interconnected complexity is challenging many of the outdated assumptions that explain the way things work. And it's causing quite a bit of cognitive dissonance, I would propose. That this is particularly true within economics right now, because the neoclassical foundations of our economic systems are really based on this 19th century story, right? For centuries, we've been externalizing costs, ignoring the true impact of our actions on a global scale. But today, some economists like this view, this visualization from the World Economic Forum, are really trying to connect all of these wicked problems that we're trying to address, and that our ability to predict the future is really only as certain as our risk horizon and how far out we're going to paint that. And this economy we're discovering is really a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. It's not the other way around. That in the words of the Stockholm Resilience Center, they're using all of this data to look at all these global phenomena, that we're tipping towards the unknown. And we're sort of in this high-stakes game of unwittingly crossing these planetary boundaries that define a safe operating space for humanity. And big data is really starting to help us to understand this. But there's a bigger problem here. That the challenge to think globally is not something we're really evolutionarily prepared to do. That we haven't effectively evolved these strategies yet. And in my experience, scientific visualizations can be extremely useful for providing context for these complex issues across many, many disciplines in order to help develop innovative approaches to problem solving. So in my research in this and trying to understand how we can wrap our head around this stuff, I began looking into the work of Buckminster Fuller. And many decades ago, he started to realize the potential of storytelling and data visualization. So we spent much of the 20th century laying the groundwork for the development of new conceptual tools that would increase understanding from a global perspective. Now, this was kind of a massive undertaking, that he refined these approaches through this half-long century experiment to see what a single individual could do to benefit all of humanity. And in the process, he wrote 23 books about poetry, geometry, history, futures studies, design, cosmology, was granted 28 patents for everything from automobiles, boats, shelter, cartography, awarded 47 honorary doctorates from universities all over the place. And it's estimated that he was actually the most documented human in history, probably, of course, prior to Facebook and Twitter. But he kept a detailed log of his life from 1920 to 1983 when he died. So it's this pretty incredible archive that's now at Stanford that's housed in 700 volumes. So you can go back in and actually get a really extraordinary snapshot of what was going on in the 20th century. And though a lot of people really just know him as that dome guy, even the geodesic dome was an example of one of his many attempts to identify and apply nature's eternal principles to design artifacts that do more with less. And this was really the recurring theme throughout his life, that we humans have the ability to recognize these principles and to constantly ephemeralize technologies. We do more and more with less and less. We do better and better with less and less. And he hoped that by demonstrating this kind of comprehensive approach to problem solving, we could anticipate problems coming up and we could transform the self-image of humanity into what he called exquisite local universe problem solvers. Now, throughout his life, he maintained that the biggest challenge facing us was that overspecialization and a failure to see the possibilities of the big picture was really one of the things that's stopping us from breaking through with massive innovation. And this was also an idea that emerged from the 19th century assumption that the best way to understand reality was by reducing it to its component parts, reductionism. Get it? Sure. So he also realized that the global economic system was based on the same outdated story, right? The assumption of Malthusian scarcity was embedded within the dominant neoclassical economic paradigm, and that this was based on the belief that an exponential population growth would eventually cause a catastrophic crisis of global resources. This was just taken as faith. And as a result, he claimed that our modern society simply assumes that it's impossible to fulfill the needs of everyone. And this, of course, led to the misapplication of this notion of the survival of the fittest, which was sort of inappropriately adopted from evolutionary theory, to justify all kinds of socioeconomic policies based on struggle and scarcity. And by believing these stories, they actually become self-fulfilling prophecies. So he challenged these notions. He began envisioning ways in which the global future of humanity could look to innovations to solve multiple problems simultaneously. By anticipating the accelerating complexity that we're facing, he became convinced that the old story of economics really wasn't in the long-term interest of all of us as a species. And to make this case, he started developing numerous approaches to do what he called making the invisible visible. He was trying to help individuals, communities, and world leaders find new ways to realize that instead of extractive economic approaches, we could actually be regenerative. This is a 1956 drawing of his, what he called his mini-Earth, that he proposed to place outside of the United Nations as a constant reminder to the delegates that we actually share one planet. But he also wanted to be able to see the whole Earth in an undistorted way on flat maps. As you know, the Mercator projection, it kind of makes Greenland huge and it sort of distorts everything. So he developed this Dymaxion map projection to help visualize the extent to which land masses are one interconnected island, and the ocean is actually one big interconnected ocean. And to make these tools useful, he collected data to keep track of global trends over many, many decades, right? This is a particular one that he did that's a graph of man's increased travel and communication speeds around the globe that was essentially shrinking our planets for the past 500 years. And this was the same year that Gordon Moore came up with a relatively similar curve for computing power. And so he took all of these observations and worked with students to develop the first comprehensive inventory of what they called the world resources, human trends, and needs in 1965. They attempted to define what they called bare maximums of food, water, energy, housing, and transportation and other areas to enable everyone to realize their full potential. Quite a challenge, right? We don't hear a lot about people actually envisioning that. We hear a lot about kind of dystopic futures, but what does it mean to actually provide for everyone? And this was eventually brought together in a project called the World Game that was intended to help players understand the planet through the lens of this big data that he'd been collecting in order to design a world that works for 100% of humanity. And very much like what we're doing now with our software tools, he worked to prototype these displays with teams so that he could visualize flows around the planet. This is a 1970 map of bread grain distribution, paths around the world, and these are energy hotspots around the planet. And he also developed this prototype of a World Resource Simulation Center in which world leaders could see an overview of these kind of global metabolic flows and phenomena. And the idea was to have them, as Ed was pointing out, stand up and get a sense of the illusion of separateness that's forced on us by our political boundaries. And so by 1972, he determined that because of the ever-increasing technological ability to do more with less and our understanding of the extreme efficiencies of ecological systems, that for the first time in history, it was actually possible to take care of everybody at a higher standard of living than anyone had ever known, and that all humanity had the option to become enduringly successful. Now, this might sound sort of hopelessly utopian, but he wasn't Pollyannish about our prospects. He stated it pretty bluntly, that he insisted that everything really is touch and go, and that our only options are actually utopia or oblivion. It's everybody or nobody. And so a lot of this wasn't realized in his lifetime. He predicted that it wouldn't be happening for another 50 years or so. A lot of the predictions are actually right on time. But the full scope of the world game wasn't realized in his lifetime. But his 50-year experiment really demonstrated the profound capacity of what one individual can do on this planet. And he insisted that the best way to predict the future is to design it. And even on his tombstone, he gives us this primary design metaphor that when you understand complex systems, you can find the trim tab, which is a small rudder on a plane or a boat that sort of shifts the whole trajectory. So if we're using our capacity to understand complex systems, we can find these leverage points. And so a lot of what we do at the Buckminster Fuller Institute now is look for these projects that are solving multiple problems simultaneously. Instead of using specialized strategies, we're trying to understand these interconnected challenges that are facing humanity so that we can work much more efficiently within these complex systems. And I've been so inspired by this that I help to run the organization now, and for the past 5 years, we've been running this challenge program to find out exactly what these projects look like today. This is all fine and good, but you need to see embodiments of what this looks like. So we're looking really for these synergistic whole systems approaches that are revealing what I would suggest are the new stories of humanity, moving from scarcity and extraction, going towards abundance, restoration, and regeneration. So this yearly $100,000 prize is awarded after we put out this call for projects that are designed to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. Right? So like we kind of set the bar a little bit high just to see what comes back. You know, we had no idea what was going to happen when we first started doing this. But we're getting a number of submissions every year. They're absolutely phenomenal. We have an incredible jury. A lot of people recognize his name. So we have the most amazing minds on the planet thinking in these big picture systems. And I've found that through my work with the Worldviews Network that these projects are the stories that we need to be telling. It's fine and good to talk to ourselves about the big picture context and all of these problems, but people have to see what people are doing. They have to see what's possible. And so we've been asking people to be able to publish these projects on what we call the Idea Index. And we've got a number of these online. I invite you to go on and check them out. We're starting to explore the ways in which we can combine these and see even more sort of synergies emerging from different projects. And just as an example, so we kind of get to the concrete and away from the abstract, some of the winners, for instance, this is a project called the Challenge of Appalachia from a biologist named John Todd, who's developed these living machines that he uses to remove toxins from water naturally. And he's been doing this for about 40 years. And he has a proposal of what to actually do with West Virginia. Now, I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. I live in southern Appalachia, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but West Virginia is being decimated by the coal industry through mountaintop removal mining. There are huge lakes of toxic sludge. It's deteriorating the conditions for a lot of communities there. And John Todd actually has a strategy of how to go about starting to restore this state. This is unprecedented. Most of the time when people talk about this, they're just depressed and they want things to stop. But we have to start thinking restoratively. The MIT Smart Cities Group has developed this incredible transportation system that's really using on-demand systems for electric cars and scooters. And Alan Savory and the Center for Holistic Management is regrowing grasslands using cattle, totally counterintuitive stuff. There's projects in Madagascar, there's projects that are just leapfrogging leads. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on out there. We just have to focus attention on this and to tell ourselves these stories. And at one point, Fuller argued that, you know, you can't fight existing reality unless you start to build new models. I would say the same is true of stories. We need new stories. We need new models because the old reality isn't functioning anymore. And ultimately, this boils down to a very simple story, and I would challenge all of you to consider if you'd like to adopt it. Thank you.
Great. Kenji?
Switch it over. Good afternoon. My name is Kenji, and I'm here to talk about bringing emotion and the heart into data visualization and using Bella Gaia, Beautiful Earth, this project that I'm working on as an example, and elaborating on the saying that perhaps it's not what you say, but how you say it. Just a very brief background on how this all happened and perhaps reiterating some of the images and stories that have been spoken, but I met a NASA astronaut, Mike Fink, several years ago, and he told me of his story of how he looked out the window of the space station and had this complete transformation the first time he saw the Earth from space. And I was so inspired by his story that it got me thinking, how could I bring this transformative experience of seeing the Earth from space to those of us who can't go to space? And thus, Bella Gaia was born. And this, there's a term for it called the overview effect, where many, many astronauts have this transformative experience seeing the Earth from space. This quote by Heschel, I think, really undermines the point that I'm trying to make, is that we are awash in information, and, but we need to bring message and a heart and bring the subjective and the objective together. For example, some of the failures that we all know about, a 2008 study on the general public, only 4% responded emotionally to the words of climate change or the environment or global warming. So there's a huge disconnect with the abstraction of our global challenges. So going beyond the naked eye of what astronauts can see through data visualization, we can see things that we cannot see with the naked eye. And this is an example of comparing one type of data set, which is just a still photo of active fires. And perhaps if we use some different tools and some music, we can really bring it into a different experience. I don't know if we have audio here. In this clip actually profoundly affects people during the Bella Gaia performance. And talking about crying about maps, this one makes everybody cry. This is another example of one form of information. It's just a bar graph of oil consumption by country. And here is a depiction of it in Bella Gaia using actually a Google Earth KML map mapped geographically onto the image of the planet. So a study, I think there's increasing research about how the brain works and how we learn and how really we learn through memorable experiences. And a study by Antonio DiMaggio and Mary-Helen Mordino-Yang found that memorable experiences result from complex brain dynamics that allow people to interpret their experiences in ways that make meaning and make worlds we live and immerse within. Visual storytelling, conveyed through mediums such as video, music, and voice, recruits the limbic emotional brain that serves as a doorway and rudder to higher cognitive activities of the neocortex. Basically, story brings soul to data. Whether we are processing information to perform an action, communicating with others, or in a learning environment, the artistry of developing data visualization into a memorable experience is now, out of necessity, evolving rapidly. Ignoring emotional thought constricts the potential for complex information to be absorbed by many people. People need an emotional connection to a subject for it to be engaging and meaningful to them. This is an amazing new visualization by NASA of ocean currents and temperature. It's part of our ocean chapter in Bella Gaia. So how are people reacting to this? I now have 4 astronauts who have been to space, including the head of NASA, who say that Bella Gaia makes them feel like they're really back in space. So we have real astronauts vouching for the experience. Bella Gaia exists also as an expanded ensemble performance with various musicians, and this shows you a little of some of the large-scale screens that we've performed on. We perform at conferences, schools, and universities, art theaters. We just performed in Houston at a 5,000-person outdoor event. We do have a cultural component too. I think personalizing information, we zoom into different countries and we have a cultural experience, really drawing the connection between our cultural heritage and our natural heritage and how our destiny are really one thing. And there just has been so many people coming up to me in tears after the show, and I'm always just incredibly moved by their feedback of the project. 80% of the, we've done surveys, 80% of the audience members say they experience a profound shift in perspective of our planet, as well as global cultures. NASA has recently funded us, awarded us a grant to use Bella Gaia as in an education program for K through 12 kids, and we we first use the art to hook them and engage them in the science, and then we follow that with both Western scientific workshops and as well as indigenous wisdom workshops. Another amazing feedback I got from kids was that they said, oh, I've seen the Gulf oil spill on the news and all that, but seeing it like this was a completely different experience, and we had no idea that it was like this. So that's another story that I've heard of the real difference in how you tell the story. I might add also that the first female astronaut, Kathleen Sullivan, who shot the IMAX footage for the Blue Planet film, when she came back from space, she expected the IMAX imagery to make her feel like she was right back in space. But when she saw the dailies, the raw footage, it did not make her feel like that. It was only when the orchestra was scoring the music for the film and she was sitting there experiencing it with music that tears came to her eyes and she felt like she was right back in space. And as they say in film, 80% of the experience is the music and audio. So I'd like to just close with tomorrow, 4 p.m., we have a 60-minute show at the Pepke Auditorium. And I am going to give you a little sample performance, a 9-minute little thing right now for you to get a little experience of it. So thank you all so much.
Predominantly blue background and very, very beautiful.
First time in my life I saw the horizon as a curved line. It was accentuated by a thin seam of dark blue light, our atmosphere. Obviously, this was not the ocean of air I had been told it was, so many times in my life. I was terrified by its fragile appearance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. That really was a map that could make you cry. There's so many questions that I have, but our time is very short, so I think I'm going to throw it instead out to the audience because I want you to have the maximum amount of time that we have to ask. There are mic runners who will be coming around. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Somebody will get to you. Stand up, give me your name, direct a question to one of the panelists, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the limited time still available. Anybody like to lead this off? Yes.
It's on? Yeah. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm Robin Kornhaber. I'm with the Legacy Foundation, and actually in the Stranahan room, we have a map that will make you very sad. We're using data visualization to talk about our work in tobacco prevention and cessation, and we have a map of the U.S. that shows tobacco statistics and its effect on the health and economy of the nation. But I wanted to ask Ed if you knew of any other significant examples of companies or organizations that are using data visualization to talk about their missions?
There are many. I think one of my favorites, and actually it relates to a point that David was making about Appalachia. There's an organization called Appalachian Voices, and what they did was to take the mountaintop removal, and the actual scale of that mountaintop removal is largely hidden from people because it happens on the top of a wooded mountain. You don't actually see the scale of it. So they traced the area of these mountaintop removal mine sites and then displaced that and would say, okay, type in your postcode or your zip code and I'll overlay that in an area that you're more familiar with. So you'd end up with a mine the size of Manhattan. If you lived in Manhattan, it would draw over the whole of the island. Or where I lived in the UK, it was most of southern England. And it suddenly brings home to you the scale of these problems by connecting it to your own local environment. And I think that's where these new technologies become really powerful, because shading in a map in different, admittedly very pretty colors is still quite abstract to people. You know, does yellow mean it's much warmer than orange, or I'm not quite sure. Actually bringing home information and portraying it in a sense that's personal to people, I think is really powerful. And it's still something we're learning how to do. But that's a good one to check, Appalachian Voices.
Great. Next question. Yes, please. Okay, let me throw one out quickly while there's one. Where? In the back? Okay, in the... Here's a mic coming up for you now.
Rahul Bhandari from Washington, D.C. I used to work at Intelsat and sat in on a couple of satellite launch centers, control centers. And my question is, are the astronauts listening to music when they're up there? And what kind of music are they listening to?
I know that they do. I'm not
What
sure
do they
what
like?
kind.
What's on their playlist?
Well, I heard Mike listen to like Enya, and
Sort of massage music. Yes, sir?
What is the position of Google now with all the news about privacy?
Privacy, Google, Ed. Street
Funny,
View.
privacy question. I think this is something that we, as the rest of the industry, are learning as we move along. You know, I think we were having a discussion earlier about Street View and how Street View was launched here in the United States a few years ago now, with very little fuss, very little problem. And we thought that that would be the case around the world. And actually, different cultures, different nations have different views of privacy. They have different cultural constraints. So the example I like to use is in the United States and in Europe, when we design a Street View car, we put the camera about 1 meter above the roof so you can see over parked cars and you can see, you know, buildings and shop fronts and so on. In Japan, the cultural norm is to have a large wall in front of your house. You don't want to see people seeing your front door. And having these cameras on top of big posts was a big issue for them. So we had to redesign the system, move the camera lower, so you saw what someone would see if they were walking on the street. And I think we need to better understand what people's own level of a willingness to share is, and give people much more granular control, saying, okay, I'm going to share my location with you, and in return I'll get these services, but if I choose not to, it should be easy for me to make that choice, and it should be visible and transparent. And I think that's where we're coming to, saying, well, we need to be visible, we need to say, well, we'll use this information you've given us, and this is what we're going to use it for, but if you don't like it, there's the switch that will stop you from being able to do that. And I think it's something that we'll get better at over time.
Ed, one of the big complaints, of course, with Street View in Germany was that you were picking up Wi-Fi signals and getting all kinds of data that Google didn't manage to
that was a mistake.
mention that they were picking up?
That was a huge mistake. We developed some code that the idea was to pick up Wi-Fi signals because that's actually quite a good way of locating where you are. But one of the engineers made a mistake, as well as picking up the identity of each Wi-Fi transmitter, also picked up some of the payload, some of the messages that were going across unencrypted networks. So
is that still happening?
No. That
Same
stopped
thing in
very
Connecticut.
quickly.
They have trouble with that in Connecticut as well.
Promise you, it's not happening
Not
anywhere.
happening.
Definitely
Okay,
not happening.
we've got your word.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Ron Sims from Los Angeles. Can you just comment on if there's X amount of data today, in the future with all this new data, what is the growth in just the storage of all the data?
That's a good question. Think of your PC at home and think how that's grown in the last few years. That will give you some sort of an indication. When we first bought PCs, we weren't storing our photos on them, we weren't downloading movies and TV programs and all the rest. If we just followed that sort of pattern, well, you could see us kind of doubling every few years. Unfortunately, it's going to be much worse than that. There's this concept of the Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communication. It's going to be a number of orders of magnitude, so thousands of times greater within just the next few years. As these devices come online, they collect more information. So it's an ever-increasing haystack that we need to try and identify the needle in.
Could I ask one question here of all of the panelists? Anybody feel free to jump in. I think, watching this, it makes you want to do something. And I think about, every time I scrupulously recycle my water bottle and then read a story in the Times about air conditioners in Mumbai or see the pictures of the Amazonian fires. I mean, where can an individual be a trim tab on this? Sure, I'm talking to you.
I think it is the system stupid kind of thing. I think that there's a tendency, especially within education, to segment out the way that we're looking at these issues. And so we tend to think of the smallest possible things, and in the case of recycling water bottles, sometimes it is a little bit like, having an oar on a giant, the Queen QE2,
right,
and you're, trying to steer the ship. And I think the real opportunity that we have is to start looking at our education systems, to start thinking about how we use a lot of the interactive capacities and the data collection that we have, to help people to really commit their lives to redesigning civilization, in a sense. It calls for nothing less. And it's not that personal behavior change aren't critical. And it really helps us to connect with the larger cycles of life. But that shouldn't assuage any, guilt or frustration, that it's really a matter of shifting the ways in which we're thinking about ourselves and society as being integral with ecological systems. There is no distinction between the social and the ecological. And once you see that, and you start to see the brilliance that people are really capable of exhibiting when they start to design and innovate with that knowledge, it's profoundly inspiring. And I think that the more we can use our tools to be able to help people to see that big picture and those systemic interconnections, the more we're doing our job.
So clearly, if you're at Aspen, you're evangelizing to the converted here. How do you get out the word on something like this to people who are climate deniers, or if you're in Lagos, Nigeria, or someplace where you're not tuned into every tweet?
Well, I forgot to mention in my presentation that Bella Gaia has converted climate skeptics. I had an experience on the Washington Mall, and I was just setting up to perform, and this man was strolling through and started talking with me, and we got into a heated discussion about climate change. And after several minutes where it was going nowhere, I just asked him, why don't you just take a seat? And so he watched the show, and then afterwards he came up to me and said, you know what, I think you've changed my mind, and he walked away. So I think we really have to become more creative in the way that we present information, and don't underestimate the power of how we feel. I think ultimately humans act on how we feel, not how we think.
Your grant from NASA was for K through 12 education.
That's right.
Is the hope going to be with a younger cohort?
Well, I'm taking an everything approach. Yes, the education is specifically for K through 12. Obviously, kids are the next generation, and kids can also affect their parents too. But this show really appeals to all generations and all families, and a lot of our entertainment shows are for families. And our eventual goal with this is to make sort of a Broadway Blue Man Group type of fixed theater where it can be an activity for tourists to go see. And I think there's a real want and need for it.
Mm-hmm. David?
Just on that note, a lot of the presentations I give, we do encounter people at every socioeconomic strata, and I think the problem is that we've become so convinced that we're separate from the broader non-human world that something like climate change becomes this political straw man, this stand-in, and as soon as you say it, you bifurcate the audience. And my personal approach is, I don't care if you believe in climate change or not. Are you aware of what's happening with biodiversity? Do you know what's going on with the oceans and with land use and with soil around the planet? Do you realize there are huge planetary possibilities for recognizing these boundaries? And the minute you sort of lock horns over one of these contentious issues, you actually lose a lot of possibility for creative engagement. And I don't think that there are a lot of people on the planet that want to take down the biosphere or that want to make sure that it's impossible to do business on this planet. And so we need better ways of moving beyond this sort of bipartisan, dualistic approach to really help people to recognize there's a lot of stuff going on, and if climate change isn't your thing, maybe you would care that water reserves are tapping out in many parts of the world, and we just need to start to see things a bit more systemically.
Before we came on stage, the CEO of Walmart was up here talking about what they were doing to affect things. I mean, things from shrinking the laundry detergent bottles so that you don't use so much water or aren't trucking water around the globe. So where would you say the major points of leverage are? Getting to the corporations, convincing CEOs, getting to kids? I mean, where's that?
I think there's an element that the individual on their own, and this goes beyond the recycling your plastic bottles, the individual needs to understand their impact, what they can do, and realistically what impact that's going to have, but then what impact if they worked with their neighbours, with their town, with their city, what impact would that have? And that's where it comes back to this idea of the data and the visualization. You're slowly seeing people making use of smart meters and visualizing actually how much energy they're using and how by altering their lifestyle they can reduce the amount of energy. And you're seeing small sorts of social networks building of people who have meters and are combining their efforts and sharing. Okay, I go out during the day, I don't use my electricity while I'm working, you can make use of it. And when you have that insight through the information that you're gathering, and you can visualize that information in a way that people can understand, then they can start to make differences. But it's got to be more than just me as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's culture. I think Mary Evelyn Tucker said we need a culture of ecology. And I think there's no greater change agent than when something becomes habitual in a culture. And to create a culture around understanding, interacting, socializing with this data and translating it into action, I think that's really where the leverage will happen. But certainly I believe in all approaches, political, business, as well as bottom-up culture to the masses.
And I think some of the problems are so intense at the moment that we don't have time to wait for the kids. I mean, sometimes there's this tendency to say, oh, well, wait for the kids to come fix everything. It's actually the responsibility of everybody here to figure out, especially within the corporate world, how we can be working with these things. And one of my favorite sort of insights of Fuller was that we really shouldn't try to seek to reform men and human beings. We'll be frustrated that if we reform the environment so that we're actually living in integrity with the capacity of this planet to support life, then it becomes a lot easier for us from a design perspective to to help people to do the right things. And right now, we're trying to reform human beings by depending on politicians to do everything. When in a lot of
Saw where
times,
that went.
these are
Right.
design issues. You know,
Right.
let's stop leaning on the politicians to do everything, and we have to be the creative ones to figure out how to go about it.
Okay, as we, one more question over here.
I think Bella Gaia was just wonderful, and I was wondering, are you have any projects to look at data visualization in other areas beyond the Earth?
Certainly, we actually have the sun as part of it. The new SDO mission of NASA has been capturing amazing images of the sun. And I don't know if you saw the magnetosphere that is protecting the Earth from our solar wind. It's a beautiful, beautiful visualization. But yes, Bella Gaia is part of the universe. What I'm trying to do is bring context to our human worlds by giving that larger perspective. And certainly, why not bring that context even larger as the Earth in our universe and in this living universe. Our universe is so creative and so alive, and it is not little separate parts. The Earth is just one expression of that. Humans are just one expression of that.
Sorry, I just wanted to encourage you to go even smaller, to look at brain science and the kind of images that are coming from human health in the body, coming from within the body, going back out would be also very exciting.
Absolutely, I would love to do that. It's all the same. It's all the same thing.
As we wrap this up, let's end on a hopeful note. Do you have one favorite project that gives you hope that you can think of, real quick?
Actually, mine's really pragmatic. My phone, like many of you probably, have a smartphone that I choose to be anonymously tracked. That data is used now by Google when it's giving you driving directions to make sure you avoid congestion, and therefore you use less gas, create less emissions. It's a simple thing, but as David said, it's engineered as a solution, and I think there are many more opportunities like that.
David?
I'm actually pretty excited about some new science standards coming out from the National Academy of Sciences next year that really emphasizes looking at cross-cutting concepts across disciplines, and it's emphasizing practice and design and engineering as much as they are the concepts. So I think there's a huge opportunity right now to help, especially students, to start recognizing what it looks like to apply our capacity as humans to recognize patterns and to start to design things in a much more interesting way.
So really get a holistic sharing
Absolutely.
of information. Kenji, you want to close us out here?
I'm hopeful for really striving to create a culture of ecology, to reinvent a ritual, a global ritual that connects humans to nature. We have the Olympics, but we need something equivalent for really establishing our personal connection with our Earth. And I think we are beginning to realize that, and we have the information and the technology to do it. We just need to implement it.
Well, this has been really amazing. Thank you so much. Be sure to stop in and see Kenji's full performance at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.